Okay, so that time has finally come and we need to get some strings onto this thing. And I've got a set of Ernie balls, light nickel wound custom gauge guitar strings in 12 string flavour. I'll be honest, I'm not particularly looking forward to this. It's going to be a bit of a long job, I know that. From what I've seen on the internet and on YouTube and stuff of people describing the process of stringing these up, they talk about something that's kind of an hour at best. But of course, I'm going to have to cut the nut slots as well as I go along, because at the moment they're just very kind of loosely roughed in, and I do know that we'll probably have to do a little bit more work on those to get them exactly where they need to be. So for those of you who couldn't understand why I didn't just crack on and get this done in the last episode, it's purely because it's going to take hours. As well as stringing it, tuning it, all that kind of stuff, we've got to set the guitar up as well. Now, there's a fair chance that I'm going to have to notch these bridge saddles, which I'm definitely not looking forward to. So all in all, there's quite a bit of work on here. And to that end, me standing blathering for hours ain't going to get anything achieved, so I'll shut up and start to get some strings on this thing. Okay, so that's the first 3 sets of strings on, and so far it hasn't been too bad. I've had to cut the slots for the thicker strings ever so slightly just to get them to stay in position. They were only ever kind of a marker before, so now we're having to actually cut them in as we want them. But now we've got those 6 on, it brings me to a part of the process which has been kind of perplexing me ever since I started to put this thing together, and that is, what order do the strings go in? Now for me, it seems logical that all the 6 main strings should go to these tuners so that there's consistency with tuning. But because of the way these strings are configured, if we do that, it works fine up this end, but once we get down to this end, the strings are actually going to be crossing each other, which to my mind just doesn't really work that well. And I've had a look into this, and I've managed to see some up close shots of a Rickenbacker headstock, and basically what happens is you just follow on. So the next thick string to go in will have to go to this tuner, and then its drone string or its octave string will go to this one, then a thick one into this one, its octave string to there, and so on and so on. So with that established, we can get the next 6 strings on and see if we can get this thing tuned up and set up and ready to play. Okay, so there it is, strung up and sort of in tune. The intonation's close-ish, so I'm quite happy about that. Obviously, getting the intonation right with this 6 saddle bridge is going to be almost impossible, I would imagine, to get all 12 strings intonated properly. But I'm sure we can get it somewhere close. Now, I do need to do some work on the nut because the action at the nut is a little bit on the high side, so we need to sort that out. But before I do that, I am actually going to have to notch the bridge saddles because these, especially this E string, it's kind of off the fretboard a little bit, and it keeps wanting to, just with the way that this tailpiece sits, it wants to kind of move down when you play. So gonna have to notch that just to bring it up a slight little bit, and then obviously space the strings out accordingly. I was hoping I could get away without doing that, but alas, it's not to be. So it's out with the nut slotting files, and we'll just slowly work our way through those. So what I've done there is I've positioned this bottom E string where I want it in relation to where it sits on the fretboard. I've put a slot in with a 10th thou nut slotting file. I've then cleaned up any burrs with this little file here. It's actually a fret end dressing file. And then spaced the next string where I want it, cut it again, and then just working my way up. And now I'm going to start at the other end with the other E string and do exactly the same. So I'll get that positioned where I want it on the fretboard so it just falls inside of the beveled area of the fret. And then I'll get my 46th thou file on the job. And I'm not actually going in very far at all, just barely tickling it just to get that notch in. So it's enough to hold it in place. Now I could use all sorts of fancy measuring techniques on this. I think I can kind of eyeball this well enough. Now in theory we should be about 51-ish mil between the two top and the bottom strings, and we're just a little bit under that. So we're about 50.5, as the old saying goes. It's close enough for rock and roll. So I'm going to carry on with that. We'll get all of those cut, and then we can move to the other end and get the nut slots cut. At the beginning of this build, I started to keep a tab on how much money I'd spent and how many hours that I'd spent actually building the guitar. And typically for me, that kind of slipped by the wayside as things progressed. However, I have been keeping a record of the money spent, and I can give a rough estimation of how many hours it's actually taken me to build the guitar. In terms of money, I've spent about £550, which is quite a lot of money for me on a guitar build. I wouldn't normally spend that much, but there have been some kind of specialist parts that I've had to buy for this one. The bridge was expensive, the pickups were relatively expensive, and of course 2 sets of tuners. So that's all added up to a bigger build than I'd usually have, but to be honest, I think it's been worth it. I think if I estimate between 3.5 and 4.5 hours of work for each episode of the build, if we multiply that by 44, we get to around about 180 hours, which is a fair chunk of time. If you want to add in all the time that I've spent making the videos, editing, etc., we can probably double that. So I have put quite a lot of effort into this project, but again, I'm really happy with the results. I didn't think it was going to take the kind of 6 months that it has to build, but life sometimes gets in the way, and to be honest, I've enjoyed breaking it down into smaller chunks and kind of extending the series on a little bit. I'm going to put a breakdown of how I spent the money in the description of the video, so if you want to see exactly how I spent that 550 quid, you can do. It'll all be down there. Anyway, back to the build. Okay, so time to get this nut sorted out. And the way I'm going to do this, if you might have seen me do this before, is I've got some feeler gauges set up here. And what I've done is I've measured the distance between the top of the fret and the fretboard. And then I've added 10 thou onto that stack. I've already done the first one. So we'll get this one out. So many strings. So we'll just get that string out of there. Place that stack of feeler gauges in place. And then I'm just going to cut down just until we feel it make contact with that blade of the feeler gauge. We can put the string back in, and there you look. It's spot on to me. Maybe a touch high, but we haven't set the neck relief, we haven't set the action yet, so I'd rather have them a little bit high than too low, and everything goes pear-shaped once we do adjust the rest of the guitar. So I'm just going to work my way across the nut now and get the rest of them done. So that actually went quite quick. I was surprised at that. So all I'm doing now is I've just got a little bit of Vaseline petroleum jelly on a cocktail stick, and I'm just getting a little bit into all the nut slots. Get the strings back in. We'll get this back up to pitch, and then we can start looking at the rest of the setup. So we're kind of back in tune. So next up, I'm going to check the neck relief, which I'm going to put at about 10 thou. So I've got the capo on the first fret. I'm going to fret it at the 20th, and I'm looking around about 7th or 8th fret. Just check that with the feeler gauge. And that, bizarrely, is absolutely spot on. So I'm not going to touch that. So next up, I just need to look at the string action. So take the capo off. I'm going to check that. At the 12th fret, I'm looking for about 1.75 mil. And that's okay. But the treble side we're a little bit high. So I just need to drop that down a little bit, which of course means I'm going to have to retune the bloody thing. And I'd call that about there. Okay, so those two bits went surprisingly well. I didn't think that they were going to go quite that quickly. I have a feeling, however, that the next bit is going to be a little bit of a mission, and that is setting up the intonation. Now, I've only got 6 saddles, so I don't think there's any way on earth I can accurately intonate all 12 strings. But that doesn't mean we can't at least try and get it close. And if I could find the little wrench that I need, we can make a start. Now my strategy here is that I'm going to do the intonation on the main strings and hope that that gets us somewhere near. I think that makes sense logically. I don't know. We'll soon find out, I suppose. So we'll just start on this E string. And I think as much as anything, access is going to be the issue here. Now that one actually isn't that bad. Again, not too bad. Well, I have to say, I'm absolutely gobsmacked. I was expecting a bit of a battle to get this thing set up, and do you know what? It's actually gone okay. The intonation is pretty much there. Both sets of strings are very, very close to intonation. That isn't the experience that I've heard from some people with the 6 saddle bridge. However, I have also heard of somebody who had a 12 saddle bridge and took it off because they preferred the 6 on their 12 string. So I suppose that's just about personal preference and everything. But for me, that's close enough. So I'm happy to say that that's worked out very nicely. Okay, not a huge amount to do now. Stick this cover on the bridge, and we'll get all these strings snipped off at the headstock and see if we can get a demo done of this thing. Okay, and there it is, done. And apart from my somewhat dubious playing, I think it actually sounds really, really nice. I'm very happy with it anyway. It's been a lot of work, but I think the results have made it absolutely worthwhile. I'm going to be back very soon with a new build, but I am going to take a couple of days off just to kind of get a little bit of a break from the shed and enjoy having a play with my brand new 12 string. As always, until then, like if you've liked, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and it's been a pleasure having you along for this build. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.